When you look at Washington, D.C. right now, it looks like something out of a dystopian future film where there's non-scalable fencing around the Capitol with razor wire attached to it, and over 5,000 National Guard troops still deployed in Washington, D.C. as of today. So in this video, we're going to talk about where we're heading right now in the sense of what things are going to start looking like here in the future and why we shouldn't necessarily expect them to just magically go away anytime soon. Hey everybody, it's Magic Prepper, and today we're talking about the fact that we look like we're living in some kind of a permanent police state when you take a look at the nation's capital. Things are moving into a direction that is more and more dystopic every single day, and it's something we need to pay attention to right now as people in the preparedness community, because it doesn't seem like these things are just going to magically disappear overnight. And the idea of an authoritarian state moving into more of a militarized situation where the people no longer have access to those who are technically supposed to be public servants is becoming more and more a reality. And it's something that we need to really keep an eye on, because this is not how things are supposed to work here, and we don't want to live in a banana republic, but the more and more things seem to be moving in this direction, the less and less it seems like the United States we're all used to and probably love. But that being said, if you're preparing for things to continually get worse and become more dystopic as things go by, then hit the subscribe button below, because these are things we need to at least consider and keep in mind based on what we're looking like in the sense of future projections, okay? A lot of things are changing. A lot of things have changed since 2020 due to everything else that's been going on around the world. And here we are now where we're 30 days since the Capitol riots occurred, and there's still fences around the Capitol, there's still razor wire, and there's still 5,000 National Guard troops in Washington, D.C. right now. And something that we need to keep in mind is that there's bipartisan measures in place for people to ask for the removal of these troops and ask for the removal of this fencing. People from both sides of the aisle have tried to voice their opinion on it being a negative for our country and try to get this all resolved and taken away quickly. However, it's still there, which makes you wonder what's really happening in the sense of having to have this armed occupation basically in Washington, D.C. in regards to safety, okay? Well, if both sides of the aisle are against it and it's still there, you have to consider that there's something else at work or some other things at play that we might not have access to or information on as of right now. So we at least have to look at it for what it is. Right now in Washington, D.C., it looks like something out of a movie, with razor wire and fences and troops armed all over the Capitol area and around a lot of the federal buildings. It looks like something that, none of us ever really expected to see, and it's been there for a long time now. And there really wasn't any kind of security threat that occurred on Inauguration Day, but for some reason, everything is still in place, okay? So the Secretary of the Army, John Whitley, he said, and this is an interesting thing for someone in his position to say, there are several upcoming events. We don't know what they are, okay? He said that. Now, that's not being taken out of context. That's part of his longer quote where basically he tried to reason as to why the troops are in place and to why the fencing is still there and why there's razor wire and all these things still there in the Capitol right now. But his whole comment was, we don't know what they are. There are events coming up, but we don't know what they are. That does not sound like intelligence. That sounds like we're keeping things in place for one reason or another that we don't necessarily want to give the answer to. And there's a lot of things happening in the world that we could be concerned about. We know there's been cyber attacks recently where people are trying to do things as heinous as poisoning the water supply. We also know that there's been military drills in the South China Sea, and we know that tensions are very high with China, and that we have been in the South China Sea for years now trying to establish our path of dominance to let them know that they can't just go around bullying every other country in the Southeastern Asian region there in the Pacific to do whatever it is China wants. And China has definitely been pushing the boundaries and the envelope in that way for a very long time. So there's a possibility that there's some kind of a indicator of foreign conflict or a concept of some kind of outside interference going on in the world. If you look at all the chatter and you try to basically absorb all the information and the intel that's out there, somebody would probably guess that there is a good chance that conflict is somewhere nearby. I mean, we know what's happening with China and Taiwan. We know that the last administration didn't necessarily start any new conflicts, but it is very likely that every time there's an administration change, for some kind of a new conflict to arise just based on different policies and different foreign affairs officials that work within the administration. So that is something that we should be watching out for. And we could understand that in a time of war, Washington, D.C. could very much look like it does right now. Troops deployed, fencing around the Capitol, fencing around government buildings, razor wire, all the things we expect to see in a martial law scenario that are there right now without martial law being declared. Interesting times we're in, and it's something we have to watch out for. The World Health Organization also just announced that they are no longer investigating the Wuhan lab where the pandemic may have originated from. Most people seem to have already accepted the idea that that pandemic started in the lab, but somehow now the World Health Organization has decided that it's no longer an issue worth investigating. So we know political powers around the globe are struggling for power. We know that there are people being pushed and pulled in different directions in order to accomplish certain goals, like eliminating blame from something that's definitely wrecked the entire world's economy in the process. Maybe that, except for one country. But that being said, we need to actually keep in mind that this is what things will look like and probably move further and further into in the future. I don't expect the fencing and the razor wire and the guards, National Guards troops, to just disappear overnight when it comes to what we're seeing in Washington, D.C. And our country is unfortunately in a position now, especially economically, where we're going to continually go downhill towards something like a banana republic if things don't change soon. And we know that those people in Washington, D.C., they are afraid of the average person, and the Capitol riots helped them basically justify that fear, and now they're living like they need to be protected versus being the public servants that they really are. And if they weren't doing anything nefarious, and there wasn't anything that they were doing that was considered to be maybe unconstitutional or maybe against what the people would prefer to see happening, then there would be no reason for them to have any of this fear. And unfortunately, 30 days later, plus, there's still razor wire and fences around the Capitol. So keep that in mind. The National Guard should go home. The Posse Comitatus Act would say that there's no reason to have an occupied force within our own borders, but how long is that, applicable to? 30 days if you're, still protecting an area that hasn't been necessarily threatened? And the upcoming events that the Secretary of the Army is talking about, they don't know what they are, but they are upcoming and there are events. That's what we need to look at. Things are not going to just magically improve, and we need to stick together as a preparedness community and understand that what we see in Washington, D.C. might never come back to normal. It might look like that for a very long time. And what we see happening in our state capitals could start to emulate that if things keep getting worse. And what we could see in our own backyards, there you are. You know what to look out for now. And keep in mind that foreign conflict is always on the horizon, and the people who are in charge of putting those fences up and running that razor wire and keeping those 5,000 troops in Washington, D.C. are aware of certain intel that you and I aren't, and there's possibility that some of that could be bleeding over. So I wanted to bring that to your attention. I think that the state of the country right now is still relatively negative, unfortunately, and hopefully things can improve, but maybe a good start would be to take Washington, D.C. and make it stop looking like it's in the middle of a militarized zone, if you know what I'm saying. Looks like you're on the border of North and South Korea when you're up there right now, which is ridiculous. That's not how it's supposed to work, and this is not how this country is supposed to operate. So, if you have anything else to add about the fact that there's this permanent police state feeling going on, especially in Washington, D.C., leave it in the comments below. Obviously, this isn't the direction any of us want to go in, but we understand that the route we're suddenly on is going to be restricting freedom and restricting our ability to operate as free people, and we could see a police state coming down harder and harder if that's what ends up happening here to the rest of the country. So watch out for what DC is doing and keep it in mind when you're thinking about being better prepared for yourself and your family. And without anything else to say about this whole DC scenario and why we still have National Guard troops there even 30 days after the riots, that's going to be it for Magic Prepper.